Good evening, and welcome to the Hollywood Babylonians.
Hello, friends. This is your happy Hollywood history host here with your favorite Hollywood history podcast, the Hollywood Babylonians. And today I am here talking about our sixth film. Can you believe it? Our sixth film, Joseph L. Mankiewicz's witty backstage dramedy from 20th Century Fox in 1950, All About Eve, starring Bette Davis, Ann Baxter, Celeste Holm, Gary Merrill, Hugh Marlowe, George Sanders, and Thelma Ritter. And with me today, I have that wonderful entertainment journalist, off Broadway, actor, writer, producer, Miss Hallie Platts. Hallie, hello!
Oh my gosh, hi. You're the best. This is so exciting.
How are you?
I'm great. I'm happy to be a Babylonian. I'm just, oh my gosh, this movie. I have so many takes. I've never seen it until this wonderful opportunity arose to watch it. And now my mother is 1,000% prouder of me because now I've seen it.
Amazing.
But yeah, obviously I knew about it as a cinephile because, not going to lie, on a good week, I go to the movies probably 3 or 4 times.
Right.
So I knew about it from the textbooks and the bumpy ride, of course, and Bette Davis is serving. But other than that, I had no idea that I was in for probably one of the best movies written about women ever. I mean, I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready for we're going to get into it, but I wasn't ready for also like sociopathic, different shades of sociopath out the wazoo. Ready. Anyway.
I know.
I'm doing great.
So many different shades of sociopath, and you don't know exactly who to root for. And I thought this would be the perfect film for you. We were supposed to talk about another Bette Davis film, Now Voyager, which we'll get to along the road, but I thought this would be the perfect film for you because you and I love theater both so much. And this, and it's hard to tell whether this film is in it to tear Broadway apart or it's a testament to Broadway. What do you think?
Love that you brought this up. My first note that I wrote down is we love a movie about how much theater in Hollywood are millennials and Gen Zs. Because I have one of my hot takes to get us going is the
Allie's
theater community in this Allie's hot takes, which probably just like lukewarm, but you know.
No.
But oh my gosh, theater in this freaking movie, it's like, I mean, it's definitely a kind of love letter, but it's a very basically this guy I feel like has been burnt by some theater people. Mr. Mankiewicz, I'm gonna call him Mank for short, even though he's not the Mank. He's the other Mank.
The other one.
Dude, Mank has obviously been around some jaded theater folk because this movie comes in hot with just, okay, so we love these people and good God, they're pieces of shit at the same time. They are pieces of work. And I just couldn't help that, like, the theater community in this movie is so, like, they're the millennials and then the movies are the Gen Zs, where the millennials are like, we made you, and the Gen Zs are like, you're old.
Yeah.
And so I was, I actually didn't realize because, first time watching this, I had no idea we were just circling Manhattan theater world the entire movie.
Yes.
I was super here for that. I love when Hollywood does New York, and I love when Hollywood does theater specifically because it's just an interesting, there's always like, we know you too well. There's an underlying theme of that I feel like going on a little bit.
Right.
But I loved that. I mean, right off the bat, loved it.
Yeah, awesome. One of the great things about Mankiewicz was that he had like kind of a sixth sense because he had never worked in theater before, ever. And he had never worked in theater, but he worked in Hollywood. And he had an idea around 48 or 49 when he was writing the film before this, Letter to Three Wives, which he also won Best Director and Best Adapted Screenplay for. But he he had never worked in theater, but he wanted to make a film that kind of exploited Hollywood, behind the scenes Hollywood as he exploited the theater world. But that was considered a little bit too edgy, because he didn't want to be blacklisted. At the time, he didn't want to throw anybody under the bus. He might never work in Hollywood again. Billy Wilder and Charles Brackett at that same time were over at Paramount making Sunset Boulevard, which did that to the entire Hollywood studio system, but not Mankiewicz. So it's almost like he wrote the film about Hollywood and then just dropped it in Manhattan. But it transfers so well. It does.
Could have fooled me completely because I was sitting there going, yeah, this is theater out the wazoo, theater community, New York theater community. The one thing that struck me, I mean, we can get into it, but first off, that just doubles down on the take that Hollywood is Gen Z because they can dish it, but they can't take it. Yes. Basically, they're like, you can talk about across the country. You can talk about the East Coast being corrupt and the theater community being up their butts about, you better do my play perfect and you're old and you're young and I'll let this behavior slide or not, but they're not ready to address it themselves. I wonder if that also has to do with him using, his focus on women maybe was allowed a little more since it was theater. I don't know. Maybe there's something there, maybe not. But that is fascinating. Yeah, could have fooled me. It was spot on theater. I think I also texted you that this movie is about the freshmen coming in and getting the seniors' roles. Yes. And then the teachers being like, hey, I thought you guys were getting along.
Yeah.
and I wasn't ready for that, but I was super here for it. I love good drama about drama.
Yes.
Love that.
Yes. One of the first text I woke up a little bit late today because we were supposed to record on Thursday and I just had a few pages of notes written down and I thought, oh, it'll be okay. And then over the weekend, I thought, I need to expand this. So yesterday I just sat down and wrote for like 9 or 10 hours and didn't get in bed till like 3 or 4 o'clock last night. And then I woke up to your text and I was like, I am ready for this. This is going to be so exciting. I usually don't do that anymore because probably everybody who listens to this podcast, all 3 or 4 people know that I've had problems with sleep in the past where I haven't slept. But anyway.
No, I'm kidding.
Yeah.
Same homie.
Oh, I know. I saw also because I sent you All About Eve and the movie, and I see when you download from WeTransfer. So I saw that you downloaded it like 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and I was like, she's up too.
It was 1:45 a.m., baby, and I was watching it.
Great. Well, and I almost thought about texting you to be like, do you like this? What do you think about this movie? And I know that you love contemporary. Yes, I know that you love contemporary film. And I was concerned. I was like, oh, Bette Davis is going to be too presentational. She's not going to like it. She's going to feel like it's too slow.
Oh, my gosh. No. So funny you say that because first off, always here to learn. Second off, it's so funny. I would consider myself a cinephile to an unhealthy degree. But I'm not going to lie to you. I definitely know like later 60s and up, like The Graduate was kind of like my dip in, which that's the whole, that movie's notorious for changing the way people thought about what movies could do. Right. But it also totally blind spots me to, early stuff minus like, of course, musicals, because Wizard of Oz and Singing in the Rain, you can't miss too hard. But although I did not see Singing in the Rain until I was 16, which is a crime. Everybody needs to go watch that movie right now. It's perfect. It's a perfect movie.
You've seen it. That's all that matters.
Too many times.
Yeah.
My life is complete. I can die. But yeah, I'd missed All About Eve completely and kind of the Bette Davis Renaissance, shall we say?
Yes.
Her entire period. And I've even missed Marilyn to an extent, which we can talk about Marilyn later because my God. I had to kind of take it one step at a time watching it because part of me realized, one, they do not make movies like this anymore. Like, regardless, this genre is, I'm so sad to say, non-existent anymore.
Right.
I saw a critic say, this is an adult movie. Like, this is a movie for adults. And I'm like, God, we don't have that anymore to an extent.
No.
It doesn't, ratings aside, like, we don't have a movie where Bette Davis just gets to have an entire scene where she's talking about her age and you're riveted and it matters and it's interesting and different. And
Right.
she's saying stuff. I mean, she's saying stuff in this movie that we don't even we don't really comment on now, regardless of our, the times changing. Her brutal honesty and the way she does it, obviously, is just signature. And we do have that kind of level of performance nowadays in different ways, but not in a drama, not in a straight drama where it's kind of them talking in a kitchen or in a, at a house, at a party. We don't do that anymore. And so I had to totally I had to take a second and be like, pretend you're watching this movie in the 50s when it just popped out, and pretend that this is just the way people talk. Like, pretend this is normal. Because I was even kind of having a moment beyond Betty, even with Eve, I kind of had moments, and I'm sorry, I'm forgetting the actress's name. Isn't it Anne something?
Anne Baxter.
Anne Baxter.
Yes.
I'm the worst.
You're
Baxter.
good.
Got it. She's phenomenal. To me, she'll always be Eve. She's just Eve. I hate that if that actually affected her career, but she killed it. But yeah, even watching Eve, I'm kind of sitting there going, how do they not know she's lying? But then I'm putting myself back in the 50s and I'm like, no, wait a minute. People were this kind of heightened, mannerism, heightened language every day in a way, especially this crowd, which is kind of elite, I suppose. It's interesting. That was actually, now that you say this was totally a Trojan horse for Hollywood, makes so much sense, because I'm kind of sitting here being like, do theater people, as highfalutin as we can be and as low-key pretentious as we can be, do we really talk this highfalutinly? And then I'm like, oh, Hollywood, back in the day, for sure. Glam, yes. Hollywood, LA glam. Like, it struck me they were kind of talking like Los Angeles folk. Shout out to all the Los Angeles folk out there. I'm not saying anything bad. I'm just saying. Yeah. They were about the glam, and New York can get that way, but theater people can sometimes be a little down in the dirt. Right. And so I can definitely see that now. But yeah, I think putting yourself in the 50s to watch it, changes the game. And then you realize, oh, I'm watching something not only that kind of doesn't exist anymore, but something special for the time that no one had really seen before. Yeah. And it makes it so much fun. I mean, what a delight.
Right. Well, and yeah, the dialogue is written, it's very much in that style. Then a lot of people were used to it in the movies. Very witty, kind of drawing room comedy of manners type of dialogue. And people were completely okay with sitting and watching two people talking at a party in a living room, in a kitchen, or walking down the street. Today, it's like, no, we have to have a million different things going on at once, and we think it's amazing. And it is amazing. But just to kind of step back from that. But yes, I guess it was different for the time because, they had never had kind of such an exploitative, whatever that word is, film for Broadway at that point. One of the first things that we were talking about, because you were talking about watching Eve for the first time. And I grew up, one of my mom's favorite actresses was Bette Davis, or is still Bette Davis. So I grew up watching a lot of her films on TCM. Now, TCM is Turner Classic Movies, Ted Turner. Ted Turner owns the Warner Brothers, MGM, and RKO library, along with Warner. And then Warner Brothers Home Entertainment owns that also. But he has the rights to show it on TV. So they barely show 20th Century Fox films unless they want to pay Disney a whole lot of money. So Eve was not shown a whole lot on TV when I was growing up. I saw it for the first time all the way through when I found a DVD at FYE, if you remember, for your entertainment. Did you have an FYE?
I didn't have an FYE, but I woke up to TCM all the time because my mom is obsessed with pre-19... See, she's the opposite of me. She's obsessed with pre-1960s movies. And so she literally waking up to black and white domestic dramas was classic Saturday morning for me.
That's good.
Obsessed. But she's up there with me where she loves... She's up there with me in terms of this film puts her in a different mindset. Like these kinds of films put her in a different mindset. But it's so funny though, because she'll understand the heightened mannerisms and the heightened language and everything so much more than me. Probably because realism and Meisner acting and like
right.
post Brando has kind of been drilled into us.
Right.
And for her, Brando and Vivian Leigh and Bette Davis for sure are her pinnacles. Funny side note. She totally a few months ago she goes, Hallie, have you heard of a movie called Dog Day Afternoon? And I was like, I have. It is a cinematic pinnacle. And she was like, I've never heard of this movie. It's
really?
So interesting. Yeah, she'd never heard of it. But she's like, how can you not have seen All About Eve and the Philadelphia Story, which, by the way, I it's a crime I still haven't seen it. I need to see it. Okay. But she's like, how could you not? How could you not understand? And she's like, Gone with the Wind is the pinnacle of acting. And I'm like sitting there being like, okay. I think I get it. Whereas, okay, but I will say Judy Garland, I get. Magic. Whatever Judy does,
she was like
everything.
She was realism in a crowd of presentationalism at that time. She was just Judy on screen. Yeah.
Good point.
Yes.
Good point. Because anytime she's amazed in Wizard of Oz, I believe her. I'm like, that's how you would look at an Emerald City. That's how I would look at that. That's how I would feel about a dog. Like,
exactly. She was completely herself. She was comfortable with being herself on screen. She didn't have to kick it up several notches. I did want to say about Bette Davis. She said in many interviews later in the 1970s how much she wrote about it in her autobiography, The Lonely Life, which we'll talk about a little bit. She despised realism. She grew up in a school of theater and then film. She said people come to the theater, people come to see films to escape from reality. They don't want to go and see everyday life. They want, she was at her pinnacle in her career during the Depression, during World War II. When she could choose, storm around a set and choose sceneries. She said also that the camera should never be telling the story. The camera should be following the actor, whatever they do. So, yes. Which I don't completely agree with. Nobody would buy into Betty. I mean, she's fabulous in this movie because that character it is camp. There wasn't a word at the time. Yeah, there wasn't a word at the well, I mean, it's as much camp as Patti LuPone is camp. But without a question. Yes, there wasn't a word at the time to describe camp. There were many women's pictures which were attended by many men who at the time were known as homophiles, but which was I know your eye roll.
No. This makes sense.
Yeah, they were known as
thinking back, and I'm like
homophiles, but they were known as bachelors. And that was not a thing many people thought about. You talked about a little bit. You texted me about Eve's sexuality.
Yes, I didn't know if I was making it up. I didn't want to. I didn't want to be projecting, but I was like, nah, there's something, right? Like the first time it kind of dawned on me was the moment that Bette Davis is kissing Bill when she's about to go on the train, or she's about to go on the train, I believe. And I don't know, Eve just gives her a look, like a jealous look. And I'm like sitting there going, she's not jealous of Bill. Like, she wants Betty.
Yes.
I know I probably was projecting a little much, but I don't know. There was something there, or I thought there was going to be some kind of interesting bisexual love triangle. I was here for it. But that was just like the first thing. I was like, okay, maybe I'm making it up. Maybe she's just, maybe we're going somewhere else. But it didn't seem too much about the fame at that point, which I thought was interesting. And then the other thing is later on, but then there's the shot. You probably know what I'm going to say, but the shot of when she's playing the playwright, and when she's playing him on, she gets her neighbor, quote unquote, to call him on the phone, and then they walk up the stairs holding each other, and I was like, yeah.
Well, and
come on, right?
Okay, first and foremost, she I mean, she
Talk to
wanted
me, Ben.
She wanted Bill and Lloyd, I think, for personal gain more than anything else.
Totally.
And you find that out in her last monologue when you're like, you are flipping bonkers. You know, you do not want them for any kind of romantic tendency. The thing about, okay, when we get into talking about the development of this story, you'll realize that it might have been a little bit, well, it was in a way that, you know, about her sexuality. At the time, because of the production code office, because there were no rating systems, the production code and the Catholic Legion of Decency had to give it its stamp of approval. And at that time, nobody really thought about, you know, it was very much nuclear family thinking of like men like men, women like women. There's no deviating from that. So Mankiewicz, he could not blatantly put in the script, you know, like that was going on. Because Eve, very first night after she meets Margot, she moves in with Margot, you know, and it's like, okay.
Yes, she does.
Yeah, she does. And you're like, okay, that was fast. And then, you know, she goes up the stairs with her friends, and, you know, they're supposed to be like, oh, good girlfriends in the same boarding house. But it's like, there's a little bit more than that. So Mankiewicz had written in the script that kind of underlying tone of Eve and of her sexuality. I don't know, because you asked me if it was homophobic. I don't think he meant it to be homophobic one way or the other. I think that was just an aspect of her character that he underlined. You know, there's a lot of different things in his original outline, his original script that were too much for the production code office. They were like, you cannot have that in the movie. You know, you cannot blatantly have that in the movie. So then he had to pull it all back and then write, you know, it was like almost writing in code, put a high level of gloss on top of it.
Sure.
So people like us could have.
I demand that director's cut.
Yeah.
Hell yeah. They did it for us. I demand that director's cut first off. Maybe Beyond the Grave, I'll be able to stream it in the clouds. But no, okay, so oh my gosh, so many points you just made make a lot of sense. So two separate points. Like one, so I was definitely curious about like what you thought about, was this movie homophobic? Because to an extent, like they're not considering obviously the community, but at the same time, it's like, okay, arguably, and correct me if my take is totally off, but Eve and Addison seem to be the most queer-coded characters, if not they're actually queer. And they both seem to be, you know, arguably the most diabolical, cunning, you know, kind of pieces of, just, you know, give or take your take, but pieces of shitty characters. But that being said, okay, so that's one thing I want to totally get that out of the way of being like, yeah, there's probably some homophobia there. That being said, there's something that holds up to me about marginalized characters going and getting their dues, if that makes sense. Being ambitious to the point of like, nah, I'm gonna burn this place to the ground to get what I damn well want. And there's something weirdly, I don't know what it is, maybe it's me being also a woman, but I also think there's something to Eve, especially, you know, as with her femininity, that there's something interesting about her being like, yeah, I'm using men only to get my thing. And I'm using women, but in the process of using the women, whether it's Karen, whether it's Betty, sorry, Margot, but she's Betty, you know. Whether it's Karen or Betty, she is doing that and having a good time doing that and kind of forming a weird intimacy with them in a way that she doesn't give a shit about doing with the men. And there is something so high-key, low-key, as someone who loves thrillers and someone who loves psychological thrillers and sexual like takes on you know, society or societal takes on sexuality. It's like there's something so refreshing about seeing a 50s movie written by a dude that goes there. And it goes there in a way that people respected and took to. And I don't know if I would go so far as to say people probably related to it. I'm sure a ton of people who, you know, were on the femme side of things definitely did. I mean, at that time when they're putting in all the societal boxes, anybody shoved in boxes. But there's something so nice and refreshing to seeing just sociopathic moves on that end, because at the end of the day, you're getting stifled and you're going to go there. Like, it's a really, it's interesting, I guess. It's got a lot, there's something that also holds up there. Like, I think we're seeing kind of resurgences of feminine focused thrillers and feminine focused psychological thrillers and stuff.
Right.
But they almost don't go, I would argue that even something as great as Promising Young Woman, which I am a huge fan of, to be clear, doesn't, you almost excuse her behavior a ton because of certain choices she makes. And I like the idea, of Eve she doesn't have an excuse except she wants what she wants. Right. That's it. Like, that's what she's just doing what she wants. And that tickles my fancy. I like that. I also think there's also something real fun about when a woman is rich and has clout, or when someone who's marginalized is rich and has clout. They can do just about anything to an extent. They can do whatever they want. Obviously, I'm sorry, I'm disregarding privilege stuff like that. But there's something about being rich and having clout that you can get a lot. You can get away with a lot, and that's a lot of fun to watch. That's kind of where I'm going in my brain with all of this. But yeah, there's something to that, I think.
No, yeah. Oh, yes. All really good points. Several things, starting back with the beginning of your conversation. Two queer-coded characters, Addison and Anne. Starting off, many contemporary critics love Anne Baxter as Eve because she has a fantastic vocal range. She can play the sweet, innocent femme with the higher vocal range, like when she first meets Karen and Margot and all of them in the dressing room. And then when she becomes, I don't want to sound homophobic, but more butch, manipulative.
Yes. I totally get it.
Yeah, she drops that voice. Yes, she drops that voice to her balls, really. So it's just like her playing those tones in her voice. Addison, George Sanders, who played Addison, was bisexual. And, he had...
No way.
Yeah, he is almost like a Disney villain in some ways. And he's the first voice that you hear in the entire movie. And he's the first one that kind of takes you out of reality and is like, this is a 1950s, 1940s witty drawing room comedy type style, Because nobody talks like that. Nobody talks like the royal family anymore.
Everyone should. That man has the best voice ever. Also, he totally is a Disney villain. Did you know he was Shere Khan in the Jungle Book?
Yes, I did know that. Yeah, and that was shortly before I know.
Tiger Queen, baby. Oh, what a fabulous, what a fabulous voice.
But he said at one time, if I live until 59, I'm going to commit suicide, because he didn't believe in living into his 60s, into old age. So he committed suicide shortly after he made the Jungle Book, which is very sad. But he has a very interesting backstory, which we'll get to. I promise we'll get to his backstory sometime. I wanted to keep talking about Anne Baxter, George Sanders. You talked about Mankiewicz and his writing of these female characters. And he queer-coded some of these characters. I'm wondering if some of the female tropes of the time were just queer-coded. Because, there was no such thing as lesbian. There was no such thing as gay at that time. I'm wondering if that's a possibility. Mankiewicz said, because he loved writing and directing films with women as they were female focused. He loved those films. And a journalist eventually when he was older, interviewed him, and he said, "Why did you like doing that?" And he said, "Well, men are boring. Men act and behave and are built like they're told to by society." He said women,
that's right.
Though, yes. He said women, though, act and behave like they're built by the wind, which I think is very interesting. Well,
I love this guy.
I know.
This guy's fun.
And that's not to say, they're silly little women. It's like they behave like human beings. Men without the societal structure also behave like we're built by the wind at times.
Right, totally.
But at that time, it was more acceptable to see a woman, just go whole hog sociopath.
Well, there's something totally true about like a man's perspective in that era about women too, because at the time, Granted, it's always gonna, as long as the patriarchy exists, like, men will always be held to a societal standard of performance. And there's something, I'm sure this guy probably got a little bit of liberation, writing for the feminine in a way. Like it's really the feminine parts of anyone. And I think, and I think I want to like add that on to my earlier statements, is like the feminine parts of anyone going batshit is kind of the greatest thing ever. Like, I think that's what makes this movie especially interesting, is, to your point, there's so many different feminine shades in this film. Yeah. And it you could say it's represented by kind of the foursome of main women in the film, but Marilyn's there too. I think she kind of rounds it out as 5, I would say. But yeah, there's something there for sure. And I think, good on him for doubling down though on, against societal pressures and industry standards, like saying, no, I like writing what I like writing. That's a super, that's really cool on his part. And, I'm of the opinion, and, this is just me. I just love that he let the feminine characters go there. I don't mind if they're queer coded or not. I think they are. I also think it's beneficial to, minus obviously the censorship. It's beneficial for it not to be blatant. It's beneficial for it to be nuanced, because then you create, you get people coming in 2022 being like, yeah, I know this. This is, you invite a whole new sense of community around this, which I was, as I was reading up, I kind of had tapped into this because I was a little bit familiar with the idea of camp and Susan Sontag from being in New York and literary stuff, and camp has kind of risen back into the mainstream, thank God, as it always should. Yeah. But I kind of I had heard this was a pinnacle for camp, and the queer community really kind of goes around Bette Davis in this film and kind of puts her up there as a main a main reference for inspiration. She's giving, you can see drag queens in her performance. You can see, you can just see presentation style performance there to the nth degree. Also, real quick, side note on what you said earlier about she doesn't like realism. That actually blows my mind, because I actually weirdly think whatever plane she's on, whatever cloud Bette Davis is on, I never questioned the realism of her choices, like the realism of her acting. Really? Never. I was like, this is a real person. Like, this is really how this woman is. In fact, I actually thought she was more realistic than even the men in the film. But it was fascinating. So it's fascinating you say that. I'm very, very impressed with that, because good for her for doubling down on her process and her style. Well, it holds up. Yes. Well, and at the time, it almost seems like sometimes in the movie the men were props. They were just props. For the women, without a doubt, love it. Here for women it. Love and for Makewitz. Sorry. No, you're fine. One thing, school of thought, nobody talks like Bette Davis anymore. Nobody walks like her. Nobody has hand gestures like her anymore. No, who's the closest, in your opinion, to a modern Bette Davis? I'm trying to think myself. Okay, so she's considered at the time, because at the time that she rose to fame, it was a lot of glamour girls, glamour queens. Everybody had to be very beautiful. Yeah. One of her rivals was Joan Crawford, who always had to be so glamorous, so beautiful on the screen. They thought that those women could not act as well as, say, Garbo, Bette Davis, Katharine Hepburn, who were also women, who were also beautiful women, but they were not as glamorous as these other women. So Meryl Streep has said many times that Bette Davis was the very first character actress on film, which I believe. I agree. In a certain sense, I completely agree. Yeah, Meryl Streep is very much akin to Bette Davis in the fact that she's also a character actress. She takes the character on completely and lets it change her, which is amazing process to watch. I don't think anybody outside of a drag queen performs like Bette Davis does anymore, though. I think Kate Blanchett has a little bit of that built into her, because she played Katharine Hepburn. She loves classic films, but I don't think there's anybody like her anymore. No, I agree. My head went my head went to Meryl. I had actually forgot about Cate Blanchett, but she's definitely in there. I was also thinking Helen Mirren, but Helen Mirren's a little more classical, so it's not quite the same thing.
Right.
But yeah, there's not really, Susan Sarandon played her in the Ryan Murphy series. I knew that. Oh, the one person that I would maybe say is up there is Jessica Lange. But Jessica Lange doesn't. I'll argue, and don't come for me if you love Lange. I'm sorry, I love her too, but I would say Lange is less believable. I always think Lange is like a little above real. She's almost Nick Caging it. That's probably not cool of me to say, but she's doing her own thing for sure.
Right.
But it's not the balance to your point of I believe every word this woman's saying, and it's not real. It's above real.
Yes.
So yeah.
Well, and one more thing, while we're still on the topic of Betty, she always said she did not, very much different to a lot of the stars now, a lot of the stars back then. She always said she did not care as what she looked like, as long as she looked like the character. And that was a testament to her realism as well. And, she was a person who threw herself into her craft, very hard worker. She'd learned all of her lines. She'd learned all of her co-stars' lines. She would already plan out the direction and the blocking in her head before she got on set with the directors, not Mankiewicz, not William Wyler, who she worked with on Jezebel, Little Foxes, other films that she had done. But there were a handful of directors that really, really loved her because they could work with her. Most of the directors in Hollywood despised her. She would get on set. She would have rewritten the script. She'd be like, okay, so these are all my rewrites. This is what we're doing today. She would start reblocking everybody. She'd start directing everybody. She'd start producing. She would take over the entire process. And most of the time she was right. If she got on.
Of course she was right.
Yeah. And she was the one that made a lot of her films very, very successful. And that's another thing we're going to talk about here in just a second when we finally get to these notes. I said recently to a friend, Maddie McQueen Monholland, who played Eve in our radio play.
Shout out, love her.
Yes, love her. I said if Eve had been done in the 1980s, it would have been a slasher film, because definitely Eve would have.
Beyond, you would have had Glenn Close. It would have been Fatal Attraction. But
yes, she would have murdered Margot and cut off her face and worn it as her own and tried to assume the character of Margot. But this is the 1950s, so this is kind of a predecessor to some films like that. Stephen Pounders, who played Addison DeWitt in our radio play, which he did a phenomenal job. And he was, for all of our listeners, he was one of our acting professors at Baylor University. He's phenomenal.
Yes, man. Shout out. Love you, Stephen.
Shout out. We both love you. He said in an acting class to me.
We love you.
Yes, we do. We love you. We will never get over you, Stephen. But he said he did not like Betty Davis because he felt her too, Stephen's very much a realist. He did not like Betty Davis because he felt like she was too over the top. Now, he loved men in Hollywood, such as Claude Rains and Spencer Tracy, men that, and to a certain degree, George Sanders was very much a realist, even though he has that ridiculous accent, which I wish we all spoke in still, but nobody talks like that anymore. Just very much. Spencer Tracy said it best for like the best actors in Hollywood at the time. He said, acting is the easiest thing on earth as long as you don't let anybody catch you doing it.
Damn straight. That's fair.
Yeah.
That's so interesting. It's so funny you say that because watching this, I definitely thought, shout out Stephen if you're listening. I definitely was wondering if Stephen would approve of the different choices. I was like, what would Stephen Pounder say?
Yes.
And that's super fun to know.
Well, and also fantastic little fun fact about Stephen. When I was thinking about like who would be best to play each of these roles, I thought, Stephen Pounders would make the perfect Addison DeWitt. And I emailed him and I was like, I know you probably don't have time or, don't have the resources, whatever. And he was like, no, that sounds like an amazing project. I'd love to do that. So I sent them all the movie. He was one of the first to download it and he watched it after we had our rehearsal reading. I said, Stephen, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but do you have any notes or anything? And he'd watched the movie, all very constructive notes, all very everything. But he sat and they talked for like 30 minutes and I was like, yes. And it was amazing. It was good constructive feedback. But I mean, you could tell that he kind of had he has an admiration for what they did in the movie, what Bette Davis did in the movie, even though if she's not his favorite actress of all time. Really.
No, I get that. I love that. Oh my God, love you, Stephen. They also killed it, literally killed it.
Yes.
But no, it's a flavor. It's a flavor. And the thing is, I think it's real and it's not because Betty is that person. Like right. I mean, this is a tailor-made suit for her, so she gets to do. She's not lying. She's not being a phony actress. She's not acting. She's doing her, and that's something I think actually like people. I think a lot of times when I've worked with actors as a writer, actors want to rise to a level, and I'm something that I think Mank nails is he's meeting them where they're at. You got to meet the actors where they're at because they're on a level. It's not about rising to a level of realism. It's not about rising to a level of above realism. It's what do you do, and let's work together. And that's actually something really funny we can get into regarding this playwright. This guy really has a hilariously realistic idea of what makes a good writer and what doesn't. Because I got takes for days on the playwright character and how he's like my words sing. Like you can tell Mank is so beyond hating that mentality about writing.
Yes.
Where he expects the actors to rise to the writing when you should be. Yeah, it's a literal collaboration, and I think that's probably why he and Betty work well together. Is he's not demeaning her, her sensibility, her real takes, and her intention and effort, and I think actors are actually writing half of what you're writing, even if they don't literally write the script. They are writing with you. They are a co-author, and you got to treat them as such. So love that. But anyway, let's get to the questions because I'm the worst.
No, you're fine. You're great. I mean, if you're going to write something real and relatable that your actors can perform, you will take them into consideration. Whereas Lloyd Richards was like, it's time that the piano it's time that the piano realizes that they're not writing the concerto. So,
oh my God,
he says that at one point.
I got fired up. at that. I was like, you're a piece of shit. Anyway, continue. I was just gonna say, I wanted to ask you, who are you in this movie? Are you Margot? Are you Karen? Are you Birdie? Or are you Eve?
I would love to say that I'm Karen, just sweet, easygoing, vulnerable Karen. Because, I love Celeste Holm. We'll have to talk a little bit about her. But
for sure.
She's perfection. But I would really, really love to say I'm Addison, because he is so powerful.
Oh, yeah.
And he at the end of the film, he and Eve, they're definitely in both of their ways villains. But he is a villain that stops the villainy from happening. He has the ultimate control in the entire movie, if that makes sense. So who do you think you are?
Okay, funny you should ask. So I didn't put Addison in there, but I should have because I think like you, I wish I was Karen. There are moments where Karen gets mad in this movie that I related to a little too hard because she doesn't want to get mad. I think that's a super interesting, actually, like, incredibly feminine take that Mank kind of jumped into. It's a feminine thing where she wants to get angry, but she won't let herself for whatever reason.
Right.
But that being said, I think high key I'm probably a Birdie. Just being like, yeah, I don't like her. I don't know why. That's only me with like certain people. But when I smell something fishy, like that's not me just looking at humanity. That's just like, if something's fishy, especially when someone's too goody, I'm like, nah, there's an agenda going on here. Although I will say most of the time there's no agenda, and those people end up becoming my best friends, which is the funniest thing ever. But no, Birdie had me rolling. She's eating up the screen herself, like beyond. Which, by the way, did you know this is the only movie where there were 4 female acting nominations?
No, I
This
did
is the
not.
only film.
That is amazing.
Yeah, and yep. Karen got a supporting. Birdie got a supporting, which I'm very happy about because she deserved it. Margot and Eve got leads. Addison won.
Yes.
George Sanders won, which is probably due to misogyny in Hollywood. Not gonna lie, but that being said, that the moment where his smoking gun moment is phenomenal, but even more phenomenal, arguably for me, was his interrogation of Eve behind the bathroom door. I didn't know he was interrogating. Obviously, I mean, I'm dumb, and I was like, sure, there's a Schubert theater in San Francisco, even though that didn't sound right to me. But I was like, oh, maybe that was a '50s thing, and he's playing the fiddle the whole time. I loved that. Yes. I mean, that was fabulous.
He's manipulating the manipulator.
Yeah, he is.
Yeah,
nailing her.
I mean, if Birdie had gotten her way, the film would be like an hour shorter because she would have just stopped it in her tracks, been like, nah, get out of here. I know what you're up to.
Should have listened to Birdie.
I know, but Birdie disappears after the cocktail party. We never see her again. And I think if Makowitz had kept her in the script longer than that, there wasn't anything else to explore with that character, because she would have just continued to be like, I don't trust Eve. And at some point, the characters would have had to start to listen to her. But he had,
she would have said, I told you so.
Yes, too much realism at the beginning, so he had to cut her off. Anyway, okay, so I want to start off with, did you know that this movie was based on a true story?
No way. I had no idea. Yes. In Hollywood.
In New York, actually, on Broadway. So we're going to start off in the 1940s in Hollywood. There was a specific film drama, which was a female-centered psychological thriller, where the female, and they were all very successful at the box office, the female marries a man, falls madly in love with usually an older, richer man, who she finds out over the course of the movie who is trying to murder her. And so then it's about her trying to get out of this trap. Or the majority of the time, another man swoops in and saves her at the last minute. So you have like Hitchcock made Suspicion in 1942. There is a film called Gaslight, which was Angela Lansbury's first film in 1944.
Yes, Gaslight.
Yes. Undercurrent in 1945 with Katharine Hepburn. There was Notorious in 46 with Ingrid Bergman. Sleep My Love in 48 with Claudette Colbert. We'll talk about her in just a little bit. She was a great little French actress. And then Sudden Fear with Joan Crawford in 1952. So there was a whole lot of them. There's even more than that. But in 1946, Warner Brothers made their own female-centered psychological thriller called The Two Mrs. Carols. The Two Mrs. Carols is with Humphrey Bogart. You've heard of Bogey, of course.
Of course.
And Barbara Stanwyck. And Barbara Stanwyck marries Humphrey Bogart. She finds out that he slowly poisons each wife, and each wife dies. And so then he finds another woman that he falls in love with. The film was not a success at the box office. And Bogart directed part of it. He's not a good director. And so it's interesting because you have
Stick to acting.
Yes.
No, I'm kidding.
Bogart.
Stick to acting, Humphrey.
I know. Bogart and Stanwyck. It's great because their two performances, and Warner Brothers did a great job of like creating this film noir atmosphere, which they always did in the 1940s. But other than that, it gets a little bit campy, over the top. So the film did not do that well. Now the film, The Two Mrs. Carols, because there were two Mrs. Carols, because he was trying to kill one off as he was chasing the other one. In 1944, at the Booth Theater, I think we know where the Booth Theater is. It's like on 44th or 45th, between 8th and 9th. It's in the theater district.
Yeah, it's still there. Hell yes. Still kicking.
So in 1944, The Two Mrs. Carols opened on Broadway. The 46 film was an adaptation of the 1944 Broadway play. The 1944 Broadway play starred, I believe she was, Austrian-born Elizabeth Bergner. Have you heard of Elizabeth Bergner before? She was a Broadway actress, made a few British films. It's okay if you haven't.
I mean, my gosh, I had to have heard of her somewhere, but yeah, she's not ringing a bell at the moment.
Okay, that's okay. So Elizabeth Bergner was the star of The Two Mrs. Carols at the Booth Theater on Broadway, and her husband, Paul Zinner, Czinner, I believe he was Hungarian or Austrian born. He was the producer, and then a man named Reginald Denham was the director. And so Reginald Denham was the director. So in 1944, Elizabeth Bergner, Paul Zinner were taking a brief vacation, because she was about to go on tour with the show. The show was about to start on the tour. And so Paul Center called Reginald Denham and he said, how about you come up to our farm in Vermont and we talk about the tour, because we're going to have to replace several of the leads. We need to talk about the touring and the different locations that we're going to tour in. And so Reginald was like, okay, great. But that weekend, I'm driving my girlfriend, Mary Orr, who was an aspiring young actress. She was 24 years old. I'm driving her to summer stock in Maine. And Reginald was like, well, great. Just, stop over at our farm, spend a weekend in Vermont, and then you can drive her on to Maine. So that's what they did. Now, when they got to their farm, they stayed in the Woodstock Inn in Vermont. This was before Woodstock. So, yes, of course. So they...
You gotta, right.
Yeah, right. Yeah. The very first night that they got there, after they checked into the inn, they went to Bergner's and Sinner's farm while Paul Center and Reginald Denham were being the men, talking about the show and business. Elizabeth Bergner said, Mary, why don't you come into the kitchen with me and I'll teach you how to make Wiener Schnitzel. So Mary went into the kitchen with Elizabeth and they were both talking about like theater drama. And Elizabeth started to tell Mary about this terrible girl. She kept calling her a terrible girl, or that little bitch that used to stand in this little red coat outside of the stage door every night after the performance.
I want to know everything. This is amazing.
Yes. So according to Mary Orr, while talking to Elizabeth Bergner in the kitchen that night, Elizabeth Bergner went on babbling about that terrible girl who seemed to have provoked a crisis in her life. At the time, I assumed it had upset her because she had been so kind and that she felt she had been stabbed in the back. It certainly became an obsession with Elizabeth about that girl. Much later, I began to wonder if there had been a closer relationship than what Elizabeth told me. Maybe she had been terribly hurt, brokenhearted. I don't know. That's just a guess. So what eventually happened was Elizabeth saw this girl in this little red coat every night outside of the stage door. She eventually was like, what's your name? She brought her back to her dressing room. They started talking. She said she was an aspiring actress from Great Britain. She had left because she was afraid the Nazis were going to invade. And Elizabeth Bergner and Paul Center were, I believe they were both Jewish. They were in Great Britain. They were afraid the Nazis were going to invade, so they fled too. So she was like, oh, I can understand that. I have sympathy for you. So Elizabeth Bergner got this terrible girl, which we never find out her name, because she came up later in the 90s and she threatened to sue everybody if, they revealed her name. So Elizabeth Bergner got her a job in Paul Center's office, her producer husband, and she helped out with the producer. She helped out with Elizabeth Bergner. Later there was talk that there might have been a sexual relationship between the three. And then, there was an English actress that was a part of the two Mrs. Carols that co-starred with Elizabeth Bergner that had to drop out of the show. So they needed to replace her. So this girl, Elizabeth Bergner and Paul Center went to Equity and they said, can this girl, who's this English actress, who Elizabeth Bergner liked as an actress, can she replace her even though she's not Equity? Can she make her Broadway debut? And Equity was like, sure, but she's not English. She's from the Midwest. So she had lied to them, and she said, well, I just needed to see if my English accent was believable or not, because she was supposed to be playing an English.
Done.
Yes. So she, and Elizabeth Bergner did not elaborate.
What a theater kid.
I know. Elizabeth Bergner did not elaborate much beyond that. Yeah, beyond that, about this terrible girl and what she had done to her and her husband. She just kept talking about what a little bitch she was to Mary Orr in the kitchen that night. So after they finished dinner that night at their farm, they went back to their inn in Vermont. Mary Orr, on the way back, she told Reginald the story that Elizabeth Bergner had told her. And said, do you remember that girl? And he was like, oh yeah, she was out there every single night in a little red coat. I wasn't exactly sure, what happened to her. They got back to the inn. Well, and the next day they got up. Reginald was a bird watcher. Apparently very interesting man. So he got up early. I love it. Yes. They were not married yet. Also, they were fiancés. And so Reginald was a bird watcher. He got up early in the morning, and Mary Orr was like, well, what am I going to do all day while you're bird watching? And he said, well, you're a writer. They had co-written. Mary Orr had written for different Hollywood magazines, different articles. She had also co-written a Broadway play with Reginald Denham that had premiered several years before. So he said, you're a writer, write the story that Elizabeth Bergner told you last night. So she wrote this story. She gave it to Reginald Denham to read. He read it. And he said, this is fantastic. You should have this published. So she had a writing agent that she sent it to. And they turned it down. They said, nobody's going to want to read this. So they started to send this story out to all of these different publications in New York City. Everybody turned it down. Yes. One night, one of Reginald Denham's friends, Dale Unson, and Dale had written a Broadway play that Reginald directed. Dale Unson gave a party, and Reginald and Mary attended. Dale had written a play that Reginald directed on Broadway. Dale also happened to be editor of Cosmopolitan magazine. And when Reginald told Dale about Mary's story, Dale bought the story from Mary and published it in Cosmopolitan May 1946 issue. So what then happened was immediate. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about how the studio system works in an earlier episode of this movie, but just to recap, it was a giant umbrella. It was basically a giant repertory company. Everybody was owned by the studio. The studio even had their own story departments. So, in the story department, would go through all of these famous magazines each week, each month, and pick out stories that they think that the studio could turn into movies. And then they'd submit them to producers, directors, writers, all of the above. At the time that The Wisdom of Eve is what the story was originally called, was published in Cosmopolitan magazine. It was submitted to all of the big studios. None of the big studios were interested. Nothing happened until 1949. An event in 1949 further pushed The Wisdom of Eve onto the Fox story department. Mary Orr and her husband Reginald Denham had fallen on lean times as artists in 1949, and even though they had written, produced, and starred in 2 Broadway plays of their own, Mary was struggling to pay the bills as she could only get jobs as an actor on radio dramas. Reginald Denham had been bird watching, had been hit by a car, and both of his legs had been crushed. So she was also trying to pay the hospital bills. She went to a man named Harry Junkin, who was the head of Radio Guild Playhouse, who produced radio dramas each week at NBC. And she went to him and she said, Harry, you really, really have to give me a role this week. I'm struggling to pay the bills. And he said, well, I don't even have a script this week. And so she said, well, if I can have a script to you by Monday, will you buy the script and give me a part in the radio play? And he said, sure, if you think you can write a script. And so she then went to Reginald Denham, and she was like, I don't know what I'm going to do. I just promised that Harry Junkin, head of Radio Guild Playhouse, that I'd have a script to him on Monday so I could pay these hospital bills. And Reginald was like, well, just turn The Wisdom of Eve into a radio drama. So she turned The Wisdom of Eve into a radio drama. And so she turned it into a radio drama, and then there was somebody at Fox, was 20th Century Fox, was listening to that radio broadcast, because then the following Monday, I have the date here, I think it was in January of 1949. On Monday, the studio offered Mary Orr all rights to her story, offered her $5,000 for all rights to her story, and then NBC got some of the cut also. There's lots of details with this contract. She didn't exactly know how to write her own contract at the time because she was just an actress. So there were different rights, like her name wasn't put in the titles of the film. She didn't get mechanical rights, so she would get paid every time they put it on television, whatever. And then they were also paying a lot. Yeah,
but I get that.
Yes, but she was paid $5,000 for The Wisdom of Eve, which at the time, today's money, is $60,000. So, imagine getting paid $60,000 for, a little script story that you wrote.
Oh my God. That's not even the script. That's the concept.
Yes.
She got paid. Wow, that's good. That's healthy. Okay, yes. Very happy for her.
Yes. So Mary Orr got that. Okay. Well, and then she was able to retain theatrical rights, so she wrote The Wisdom of Eve, which was an off-Broadway play that premiered in the early 50s. And then there's a Broadway musical. Did you know this? There's a Broadway musical called Applause. Applause.
I've heard of this. I've heard of it.
And it's based on...
I didn't know it was this.
Yes, it's based on this story. And Lauren Bacall played the role of Margot, and eventually Ann Baxter took over the role of Margot on Broadway in the 1970s. So Fox had bought this, and one of the reasons so this is out of the book that I read called All About Eve by Sam Staggs.
Love it.
He also wrote the book that we talked about called Close Up on Sunset Boulevard that I used for our Sunset Boulevard episode. It's called The Complete Behind-the-Scenes Story of the Bitchiest Film Ever Made, which
Love
it
it.
somewhat is.
You bet it is.
Yes. But so Mankiewicz kind of wanted a MacGuffin because he had this idea of like writing an exploitative film about Hollywood, but he wasn't exactly sure what his MacGuffin or what was going to set his story in motion. And he found it in The Wisdom of Eve. Just a little bit on Mankiewicz. Mankiewicz, you know who Herman Mankiewicz is, his brother. So yes.
Orson Welles. He wrote Citizen Kane.
Yes, you watched that movie. You watched Mank.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Hell yeah, I watched Mank. Of course, I watched Mank.
Yes, it was fantastic. So
didn't. So many people. A lot of people didn't watch it, but I did.
I know. It was fantastic. Everybody should have watched that movie, in my opinion, but that's okay. So Herman Mankiewicz was Joseph L. Mankiewicz's brother. Herman Mankiewicz had gone out, was writing at MGM as a contract writer for the studio in the late 1920s when he brought his brother out to Hollywood, Joseph L. Mankiewicz. Joseph L. Mankiewicz started working as a writer in the late 20s, early 30s at Paramount Studios. He eventually got a contract at MGM, which was known as the Rolls-Royce of all Hollywood studios at that point. Because they had the most money, they made the most successful motion pictures. So in 1934, he started writing different screenplays for the different top stars. Myrna Loy, William Powell, Clark Gable, Joan Crawford, Jean Harlow. He was writing scripts for all of them. Eventually, they gave him, I believe, around the late 30s, 1940s, gave him right to produce. So he switched over to producing. He wouldn't write anymore. So he produced like the Philadelphia Story. He produced Woman of the Year, which was Katharine Hepburn's second film at MGM. And then he left MGM behind around 42 or 43 because Fox gave him the deal that he had right to direct. He could write, produce, and direct at Fox if he transferred over there. So Darryl F. Zanuck, who was the head of Fox, offered him that. Joseph L. Mankiewicz went over to Fox. He wrote and directed some great pictures, The Ghost and Mrs. Moore, with Gene Tierney, Rex Harrison, Letter to Three Wives, which he won 2 Oscars for. He wrote Sidney Poitier's premiere film called No Way Out, which was a racial drama in 1939. Wow. Yeah, it didn't do very well because it was a racial drama, and at that time, America did not want to be told that they were racist.
Still going on today.
I know. It's
America doesn't like to know that they're racist.
Yes, exactly. But that film,
I'm just kidding, but not.
I know. But I mean, if No Way Out, the film with Sidney Poitier, had premiered today, I feel like there would have been a lot more viewers today than there would have back then.
Oh, yeah, no. Now we like to make movies about it. We just don't like to hear it. But back then, you couldn't even do the movies. So, no,
right.
Yeah, for sure.
I know, yes.
I'm being coy, but yeah. But
yeah, I know. Well, and then his brother Herman, we were talking about Herman for just a second. He co-wrote Citizen Kane with Orson Welles. He also, and not many people know this, he was fired from MGM in 1938 because of his rampant alcoholism. But right before he was fired, he had been working on the Wizard of Oz screenplay. And he is the brilliant mind that came up with segmenting the film into a black and white section and a color section. So it is because of Herman Mankiewicz that the Wizard of Oz is in black and white and Technicolor. And that at the time was a new process. And he thought he was ingenious enough to be like, why don't we try using this? Yeah.
That holds up today, by the way. I just want to say that holds up today. If you watch that, when it goes from black and white to color, I get chills down my spine every time. I don't know why. It's like I know the world isn't in black and white, and then it's just, but you know, it that is a phenomenal choice.
Yes,
what a brilliant dude.
Yes, amazing. Mankiewicz sent a memo to Zanuck right after they had bought The Wisdom of Eve. This memo recommended that Fox exercise its option on The Wisdom of Eve. Mankiewicz also noted in his memo to Zanuck that the story fits in with an original idea of mine and can be combined. He said, superb starring role for Fox star Susan Hayward, who was, I don't know if you know who Susan Hayward is. She rose to fame for a brief amount of time. Have you seen Valley of the Dolls?
I've heard of it. That's it. That's right. I've definitely heard of it.
Yeah, she was in that. And she got to play a Margot-type role in that movie. I think Patty Duke rips her wig off and flushes it down the toilet. Anyway, go watch Valley of the Dolls. But Susan Hayward was not cast. Mankiewicz presumably, he and Zanuck had a good relationship, but presumably to get the ball rolling on Eve, he said, we have some superb starring roles for contract players that we have at Fox, so we wouldn't have to get anybody else out on loan, which would be more expensive for that time. Okay, so then this is just a bunch of little details about Mankiewicz. Then started work on the treatment for All About Eve during the late summer and early fall of 49. Mankiewicz said that he worked on the treatment for 3 months, a treatment being a detailed plot or outline, which you know, because I know you're a writer, and was titled Best Performance.
Yes.
It was 82 pages, double-spaced. Zanuck Daryl Zanuck, then revised Best Performance in the end of September as Zanuck was producer. So he revised the outline at the end of September. Zanuck and Mankiewicz had a good relationship. They didn't always trust each other, but Zanuck was known throughout Hollywood as like a good script doctor. Most studio heads they knew not to give the script to because they would just ruin it. But Zanuck was known as a really good script doctor throughout Hollywood. So Mankiewicz knew he could send it to Zanuck, who was acting as producer, and so he and Mankiewicz sent it back and forth many times. Really, by March of 1950, they had finished the screenplay, and then they sent it to the production code office. Now, you're going to find this interesting about the production code office because the production code had been started in 1922 because there had been many Hollywood scandals, such as Fatty Roscoe Arbuckle, who had apparently raped and murdered Virginia Rapay. There were several different, there was Mabel Normand and William Desmond Taylor were he was a director, she was a star at Paramount. Apparently he was murdered at one time. They never figured it out. It was either Mabel Normand or a gay lover of his. You know, many different scandals that went on in the early 1920s in Hollywood. So then the Catholic Legion of Decency almost banned all of the people in the Catholic Church. What would you call it? Catholics. You'd call them Catholics.
Catholics?
Yeah.
I'm with you.
The Catholic Legion of Decency almost banned all Catholics from seeing any motion pictures because of the scandals going on. So then Hollywood was like, we need to put something in place, like a censorship system or a rating system to make sure that Catholics, that religion at this time does not shut down our entire industry. So in 1922, there was, the office was started. It was called Motion Picture Producers and Distributors of America. Worked with what was known as the Will Hayes office, which was the production code office. And they had a production code outline of, certain things that you could have on screen that you could not have on screen. Most of it was modernist America, nuclear family type stuff. And then in 1933, it got out of hand again. So then the production code really locked down on what could be on the screen and what couldn't be on the screen. They brought in a man named Eric Johnston, who was kind of a stickler for what was in the production code. Like they weren't going to let them get away with it anymore, because from 22 to 33, they had let them get away with a lot. In 34, they were threatened again by the Catholic Church. And so they really had to lock down. And then in 45, a man named Joseph Breen was put in charge of, and he was a very, very staunch and very conservative Christian, put in charge of the production code, so it locked down even further. Now, okay, so once Joseph Breen became head of the production code office in 45, the grip of the production code office tightened, as Breen was famously anti-Semitic. That was important because all of the studios, the majority of the studios, were run by Jews. In a 1932 letter to Father Wilfred Parsons, editor of the Catholic publication America, he characterized the Jews in America as a rotten bunch of vile people with no respect for anything beyond the making of money. Here in Hollywood, we have paganism rampant. Yes, we have paganism rampant and in its most virulent form. Drunkenness and debauchery are commonplace. Sexual perversion is rampant. Any number of our directors and stars are perverts, and 99% of these folks are Jews of an Eastern European lineage. They are probably the scum of the earth. So Zanuck,
oh my God!
Yes, Zanuck was not Jewish, but Mankiewicz was Jewish. So when Mankiewicz sent the script to Breen, he had many, many, many things that he did not like about the script. Like in the script, they never say anything about a woman's décolletage, her bosom, but Joseph Breen sent them a several-page letter saying that you cannot have this in this movie, and Mankiewicz was like, we didn't even write about having this in this movie. Even though, but Yeah, but Marilyn Monroe ended up with her décolletage out in the cocktail party sequence. Anyway,
yes, she did. She looks great doing it too.
She did.
Oh my god, I love when people make things up that aren't there just because they notice it. Oh my god, boy, is that not so real. I just imagine these guys being like, we literally didn't even do that. Like, they're like checking the script notes, all 82 pages of the outline.
Yeah.
Like, we didn't do that. Like, that's not in there.
Well,
wow.
At this point, the script was 180 pages, which was cut down a little bit more past that. Breen did not like them to have Margot's dressing room to have a bathroom. He said, well, a toilet is in the bathroom, and we can't show a toilet in a movie. That was in, like, the production code outline was they could not have a toilet in the movie because, you know, nobody wanted to watch anybody relieve themselves or even have the thought that any American could possibly relieve themselves. So
okay, but not gonna lie, I found it super. I did think there might be something to the when Eve goes into the bathroom and Addison's talking to her through the door. There was something really interesting there. I was like, I don't know, something hit my head where I was like, I can't believe they're getting away with this because I don't know what they're doing.
Right, but exactly. And part of it was like, did she lock the door after the scene is over? Did he follow her into the bathroom? You know.
Oh yeah, it's because he says, open the door a little bit, we can talk through it. I was like, there's something kind of sexy about this, but at the same time, these two characters don't seem like they're, you know, and for whatever reason, like that we talked about earlier, but it's like they don't seem like they're going to get together. So there's something weird going on here. I couldn't believe they got away with that, actually.
Exactly.
The Marilyn stuff didn't even cross my mind. It was that.
I know. Well, and Marilyn... some of the lines that Marilyn said, some of the lines that Birdie said, you know, they considered it crossing the line. They got away with a lot more than they thought they would. They did not.
They did.
Yeah, they did. Well, and a lot of it is just like written so deeply within the script that you don't realize it until you seen it several times and been like, oh, there's a whole different subtext going on here.
I mean, also, all these women are just hot. Like, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Like, it's just, we can't, at the end of the day, you know, the costuming won the Oscars. Like, it's great costuming. But all these women just look good. Like, we can't get around it. You put Marilyn Monroe on screen and you're not going to feel things. Like,
I know.
Especially when she's, like, taking a drink. Come on. Like,
exactly.
It's just...
And that line she says, oh, Ann Baxter goes like, well, Betty Davis says, Eve, why don't you go with Addison? You have so much in common. And Eve said, oh, I'd probably bore him. And then Marilyn goes, oh, you won't bore him, honey. You won't even get a chance to talk. You know, and it's like, how did they get away with that?
I don't know how they got away with it. I love it.
Yes, I'm glad they did too. Have you heard of Claudette Colbert before?
I definitely have, but it's been forever because she's definitely a pinnacle of you know, women actresses of the Meryl Streep generation. They definitely point to her. Right. So it's definitely a conversation.
So first, they got the seal of approval from the Catholic Legion of Decency. Joseph Breen had a problem with Addison slapping Eve and then her falling down on the bed because that seemed one of the great sadomasochist scenes out of Hollywood. Breen had a problem with that, but he finally stepped back. He was like, okay, I guess that's not too bad. But then after he saw it on screen, he later regretted that he allowed that in the movie because he was like, that could have gone some places. So going back to Claudette Colbert, she had been a big star at Paramount in the early to mid 1930s. She had been in the original Cleopatra, Imitation of Life, It Happened One Night with Clark Gable, The Palm Beach Story. All of these were very successful films of hers. She later kind of went off and freelanced on her own. She was in one of my favorite wartime films called Since You Went Away with Shirley Temple in 1944, which is a good film. It's kind of like a very long World War II Andy Griffith episode. You know, it's just all warm fuzzies. And Claudette Colbert was this little French actress. She did not have a French accent. She was very beautiful, but she was very English, very sophisticated, very charming, very warm on screen, which off screen, her persona was kind of different. Different than that, people found her to be a little bit erratic, a little bit of a diva, manipulator. But, you know, at the same time, women at that time, I feel like, kind of had to be that in order to not get walked all over by the men that were controlling the studios. Colbert had signed on with Fox to play Margot in 49. And then she was making a film with director Jean Nicolesco called Three Came Home. It was a World War II drama in which British and American families on Borneo are sent to prison camps by the Japanese invaders. And one of the scenes, a prison guard it was a rape scene. She was supposed to be raped. Colbert knew that she was giving a great performance, that it would be Oscar worthy. In this scene, Jean Nicolesco said, just go for it. Go as hard as you possibly can. Beat the guard off. So she did. She was screaming, she was scraping, she was punching this guard, and they filmed the entire thing. And then they thought, because she fell to the ground screaming, and they thought, oh, this is the climax. The scene's almost over. And no, she had ruptured a disc in her back. So she broke her back. She fell to the ground, and so she had to go into the hospital. And Fox thought that they would be able to wait for a certain amount of time to be able to put her back in the movie, but that did not happen. So, going through the different actresses that they thought of, Zanuck wanted to use Marlene Dietrich. Have you heard of Marlene?
Oh, yeah. She's fabulous.
Very glamorous.
She would be good.
She would have been good. Zanuck wanted her. Mankiewicz did not. He did not think that she would be able to pick up on the intricacies of the role. He did not think that she would be able to perform Margot as realistic as he wanted someone to perform her. And also, Claudette Colbert would have been different than Bette Davis. Mankiewicz said Claudette Colbert would have been a piss elegant drunk. She would not have been a walking bonfire like Bette Davis was. Mankiewicz did not want Zanuck to offer the role to Marlene. So he immediately had sent the outline to Gertrude Lawrence. Have you heard of Gertrude before?
No, I don't know Gertrude.
Okay, so Gertrude, do you remember right before the pandemic, Rachel and I held a watch party of a movie called Star with Julie Andrews? Like a big, maybe, possibly. I think you were supposed to come, but something popped up for you at the last minute, so you didn't get to come. But it was a 1968 musical with Julie Andrews, and it was the team that made Sound of Music, and so Fox had basically said, Sound of Music was so successful, just do whatever you want to with Star. Star is the life story of Gertrude Lawrence. Gertrude Lawrence had started off in vaudeville, in music halls. She was bawdy, she was bodacious, she was, larger than life. She was photographed at many big parties, always wearing some eccentric outfits, smoking long cigarettes, drinking, just over the top in every way possible. Mankiewicz had...
We'll love to see it.
Yes. Mankiewicz had met Lawrence in New York. He gave her an outline of the script. She read it. She was like, oh, this is fantastic. She said, send the script to my lawyer. And her lawyer got the script. She read it. And she said, well, Lawrence would be glad to do the part. But she cannot be photographed smoking or drinking. Which to Mankiewicz was strange because he was like, that's all she's ever photographed doing is smoking and drinking. Well, and Lawrence hadn't made that. What?
That's so funny. No, I'm just like, what? Like, I guess she didn't want to, maybe she wanted to be known for being a real actor, quote unquote, and maybe if she thought she was seen playing herself, they would dismiss her or something. Right. I don't know. That's funny. That's hilarious. So she had been in the West End, in music halls, on Broadway. She had just made a film adaptation of The Glass Menagerie. She had glowing reviews all over town. That's one reason Mankiewicz wanted her. But also, Lawrence's husband said later that in 1949, 1950, when Eve was being shot, Lawrence said she just wanted to stay home and spend time with her husband. During World War II, she and her husband had been separated for so long because he was fighting and she was in shows. She made a pact with him that every other year she would take off to spend with him. He said 1950 was the year that she took off to spend with him. But also in 1950, she had just seen the film adaptation of Anna and the King of Siam with Irene Dunne and Rex Harrison, which she loved, and she took that to Rodgers and Hammerstein. And she said, I want you to write this musical. So it was, instead of being an all about Eve, Lawrence got The King and I, started. She fantastic.
I know. So I thought that was kind of interesting. So I think maybe one of the reasons that the lawyer said, put those two ridiculous conditions up was because she really didn't want to do it. She wanted to spend time with her husband and get King and I out.
As one does.
I know. Yeah.
Was Joan Crawford ever seen for it?
I have a whole list of, so after Mankiewicz and Zanuck had finished the screenplay, they sent the screenplay to the casting department at Fox. And Fox casting director came up with a very long list. The casting director at Fox, which was an entire casting department, compiled a list of stars that they thought they could play each character. Joan Crawford was on that list of women to play Margot, and so was Katharine Hepburn. A lot of different women, a lot of interesting choices that I thought could have made the film so interesting. If Elizabeth Taylor was considered to play Eve, who was considered to play Miss Caswell was Angela Lansbury, because she was, I know, that would have been a different movie. She was 24 at that point. She had a pretty big contract at MGM. She was under contract at MGM, but she had been playing, because she was such a phenomenal character actress at that time. Even though she was in her late teens, early 20s, she had been playing middle-aged women up until that point and playing it well, but she was always the co-star. But at that point, I don't know if she could have, in my mind, believably pulled off Miss Caswell as well as Marilyn Monroe did. She never played kind of one of those busty dumb blondes, in all of her work. I never saw her. In my mind, she was always at her best when she was like a powerful, kind of gutsy, sophisticated woman, which is what she'd been playing at Metro.
Okay, but it's funny. I do think she could have pulled it off, because she would play like sexy. She would kind of be doing an Eve thing. Maybe they needed a bit of a contrast.
Right.
But I think there's a sex appeal to Angela that she sometimes pulls out that's really interesting. Like, she could sultry it up a little bit, but it wouldn't be as funny, I don't think.
Right.
Marilyn's funny.
Yeah, she is. She's hilarious. Anyway.
It's so funny. I'm like, go girl, get those jobs. Get those acting jobs. Also, it cracks me up that literally so much of this film is networking. Like, it's like basic networking, but then it goes too far.
Well, I mean, even too far. So taking a break real fast before we jump back into Betty Davis is up on our list.
For sure.
But do you think that this is a possibility? Like, this could happen? Do you think somebody could pull this off?
Not only could this happen, this probably has happened 1,000 times. I actually think what's super interesting is that, speaking of the 82-page outline that they came up with, this trope, or this kind of plot, this was the first. This was the first plot like this. But now we see it all the time. Now, what's interesting is it's not quite a con trope. It's not quite it's not quite that, because she's conning to an extent, but really more than it. But for the first half of the movie, it's actually just professional networking, which is just schmoozing a lot of people that can give you a job. But when it goes a little too far is when she starts getting, the I'm going to sleep with your husband thing, which actually, but that being said, I still think that definitely happens, and would happen 1,000 times. And I will say, Bill is a very confident in his masculinity man, as far as I can tell from this movie. So I love that he tells her off and goes back home to his lady. But but that being said, it's like, oh my God, to answer your question, I'm sure this is continuing to happen in every aspect of most industries, to be honest. But I will say, I think it's actually pretty subversive that the theater community kind of admit that this happens, because I think theater people, just like in this movie, sometimes want to think we're the dignified branch of the entertainment industry, and I'm like, nah, we're dirty just like the rest of you.
I know,
we're dirty too.
Yeah, I'm sure both you and I could possibly make this happen for ourselves, like be Eve and manipulate somebody. Because there's so many people on Broadway that are so sweet and so nice, and they just want to help. And it's like, but we could also like take you down.
Oh, totally. And also tell the right Broadway person they're pretty and that they're a great actor and that you're mesmerized by their performance, and they're gonna listen. They're gonna let you stay the night in their room, kind of thing. I will say though, that's a pretty great thing to see on screen, is a woman telling another woman that she's the greatest, and the other woman being being the egomaniac that lets it slide. Like, that's actually pretty awesome. But yeah, no, totally. You just tell people they're pretty. You know what I mean?
I know. When
I say it, I mean it. But yeah.
Yes. Well, yes.
I mean it, guys. No, I think, like, obviously you want to be Eve at the beginning of the movie. I mean, I know she's technically evil the whole time, but you want to be Eve up until she tries to sleep with the husbands. And when you're not too intrusive, but you're just a very, very kind person who it would be very nice if I got to work with you guys kind of thing. But yeah, it's an interesting thing to talk about because I'm sure it happens all the time.
Okay, so we need to go back to, now I'm going to take a break from my notes for just a second because I like to pretend like I'm a very serious Betty Davis aficionado because I love her movies so much. So she had been, she had kind of risen to theatrical fame in the late 1920s on Broadway. And so in 1930, she was offered a lot of money by Universal Pictures, which primarily at that time was known for making like monster movies like Dracula, Frankenstein, The Invisible Man. So she was offered a big contract by Universal. She was encouraged by friends to go out there and try it. She made 2 films that flopped at the box office. So after about 6 months at Universal, they let her go, but then her option was picked up by Warner Brothers. And it was picked up by Warner Brothers because a very famous actor at that time, he was a famous stage actor, he was a famous film actor, his name was George Arliss, in about 1931, offered her, he called her up, he called Betty Davis up, and he said, I have seen you in this film, and I've seen you in this stage show. Would you be willing, he said, I think you'd be the perfect part for this film I'm about to make. This very, very famous man, one of Warner Brothers' top stars at that point. And so she thought somebody was ribbing her. So she was kind of giving him a hard time, and he finally convinced her that he was George Arliss. So she went to Warner Brothers. She made this picture with him. It was very successful. She was put on a long-term contract. And she continued to get at Warner Brothers. She had a very volatile relationship with the head of the studio, Jack Warner, because he constantly wanted to cast her as glamour girls and silly little housewives is what she called them. And so in 1934, he loaned her out. Betty Davis rooted for to be loaned out to RKO to play a sex worker in a film called Of Human Bondage opposite Leslie Howard, who was in Gone with the Wind. He played Ashley Wilkes in Gone with the Wind. She got great critical acclaim. However, she was not nominated for an Academy Award. People think that she was not nominated for an Academy Award because she was playing a sex worker, which was considered kind of dirty and trashy at that point. So then the following year, she went back to Warner Brothers. She rooted for another film called Dangerous that she got from Jack Warner, and that was about a troubled actress. She won the Academy Award in 1936 for her film portrayal in 1935. So then Jack Warner continued, of course, to give her glamour girls, silly little housewives in films that she hated. And there was a clause in her contract, and everybody, all stars, up until 1943, all stars at the studios had a clause in their contract. Most of the contracts were 7 years long, the long-term contracts. There was a clause that said, so if a star turned down a picture, they were then suspended without pay until, they learned their lesson, and they'd bring them back, and they'd either make that picture or they would do, they would compromise, they'd come up with another film for them to do. So this suspension clause, though, did not have a time limit on it. So they could suspend them for as long as they wanted to without pay, and it would not be added on to that 7 years. So even after, if they were suspended for 7 years, that contract wasn't up. They still had another 7 years of work to do. So that's what she was fighting against. Eventually, in 1943, Olivia de Havilland, who was starred in The Adventures of Robin Hood, Gone with the Wind, finally got the de Havilland law put in place, which overturned that law as almost kind of like illegal slave labor type of law. So Betty Davis, because Jack Warner kept giving her bad roles, in 1936, she went to England and she signed on to a contract, even though it was violation of a Warner Brothers contract. She signed on to a contract with a British film company for 2 pictures, and Jack Warner threatened to sue, and she threatened to sue back. They eventually ended up suing each other. She tried to get out of her contract, tried to get the suspension clause overturned. He tried to just sue her for all the money that he had cost her over the years. But anyway, she lost, unfortunately. And Jack Warner's lawyer made Betty Davis look bad. Like, this woman is getting $1,000 a week, which was a lot of money in that time period. He was like, she should just be thankful that some man wants to hire her to work. So that's what happened. And, she was she always said she was a staunch New Englander, very headstrong, she loved hard work, she always had to be right. So George Arliss came to her in England, the man who first gave her a really big break in Hollywood. He said, you can't do anything about this. You have to swallow your pride, hold your head high, and go back with open arms and smile through the entire thing. And she said, at the end of the day, he ended up being completely right, because she went back and all of a sudden she was treated like the queen of the lot. She was given great roles. It was like she threatened Jack Warner, and she was like, this is what I'm capable of. If you want to try to play with me, you're playing with fire. So immediately she went back. She was offered a role. It was a role in a film called Jezebel, which was about Southern Belle in the 1850s New Orleans, around the time of right before the Civil War. She won the Oscar for that. And then she said she heard of that. Yes, she had to prove to Jack Warner that she that she was worthy, that she was capable of good work. So she wrote in her autobiography, I cemented my star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame for eternity she made in course of just a very several few months, she made 5 very big films for Warner Brothers, all projects that she picked out for herself. All of them were box office hits. And they were Dark Victory, Juarez, The Old Maid, All This in Heaven 2, The Private Lives of Elizabeth and Essex. She got finished with that. She went immediately to her doctor. She was 80 pounds. He said, you're mentally and physically exhausted. You need to take a long vacation. She went off and she took 3 months of vacation. After that, after she had won her second Academy Award, made those 5 movies, she became the queen of the lot. Every movie she made after that was a massive box office hit for Warner Brothers. She was their top star, besides Errol Flynn, who was making a lot of money making his swashbuckling and war and Western films. And then, so in 1941, because she had become such a big Hollywood icon, she was talked into, she had lobbied for a long time to be the head of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. She was voted. Yeah, she was voted in, and one of the men who lobbied for her was Darryl Zanuck, voted in as their head. She lasted for a hot second. She went in with all of these. She's kind of known as forming the Oscar ceremony that we do today. Before World War II, the ceremony had been a sit-down dinner. The recipients had known, everybody knew the winners before they got to the ceremony. They had all been notified. They were just there to have dinner and accept their awards. Betty Davis said, why don't we have it in a theater? And nobody knows who won until they got there. She had several big suggestions like that. She wrote that she found out that they just wanted her as a figurehead. They did not want to hear any suggestions from her. So after 1 or 2 weeks, and she wasn't one that loved to compromise, so she was kicked out as the head. And this is 1941. She got a telegram from Darryl Zanuck that said, you bitch, you'll never work in Hollywood again. And so, but she continued to make great pictures up until 1946. So in 1942, she made her most successful film at Warner Brothers called Now Voyager, which we've talked about a little bit. It was directed by a man named Irving Rapper, starred Paul Henrid, who was in Casablanca, Claude Rains, who was in Casablanca, just to kind of give you a reference. And in 1946, because her films had become so popular, they decided to bring that team back together. Betty Davis, Paul Henrid, Claude Rains, director Irving Rapper, make a film called Deception, which was an adaptation of a silent film. And it has gorgeous sets, beautiful black and white film noir cinematography, an incredible classical score, wonderful performances. The script does not work very well. So they threw almost $3 million at it, and it lost a lot of money at the box office. So anyway, immediately after she finished making that film, she went off with, I think, her second or third husband, William Sherry, and she had her baby, Dee Dee, Barbara Davis. So in 1944-45, after her second husband, dropped dead, either from a stroke or a heart attack, she met William Sherry, who was this very rugged, masculine, ripped man, beautiful man. All women in Hollywood, talked about how beautiful he was. She met him at a party, and a month later they got married. And from the beginning, it was a very physically violent relationship between the two of them. They really didn't get along. I know, but they stuck with it because she always had to be right. So they stuck with it.
Of course.
After she made Deception, she went off and had her baby, and then she did not come back to the studio. She did not appear in a film until 1948, again, in a film called Winter Meeting. And she was so in love with her baby that she didn't root for the projects that she was in as much. So they put her in a movie called Winter Meeting. And it was like she was playing this, a Betty Davis character. She was this kind of writer of poetry, kind of mousy little lady who fell in love with this war hero. It did not work. The chemistry was not there. It had potential. That didn't work. That flopped at the box office. Then they put her in a romantic comedy called June Bride with Robert Montgomery, who's Elizabeth Montgomery's dad. Elizabeth Montgomery played Sam on Bewitched. So June Bride is one film. Actually, that was the first film she worked with Edith Head on costumes, and she loved Edith. But that film, it's actually very enjoyable. I think it's great. It's, very witty drawing room comedy. But the executives of the studio saw it. They were so impressed with her and her performance in it in the movie that they immediately signed her to a 10-year contract. Then they released the film, and it lost money too. So then, in 1949, they put her in a film that's greatly considered just trash camp now, called Beyond the Forest. And she played...
Oh my gosh.
What is now considered a vamp, like a very worldly, sexy woman who marries a man just for his money. It's a Madame Bovary tale. It's an adaptation of Madame Bovary in the 1940s. And the end of the movie ends with her throwing herself in front of a train to abort the baby that she doesn't want. Anyway.
Wow.
Yes.
Wait, you know what? I think that's how I've heard of that film. I think that was like a groundbreaking moment in cinema in terms of what they got away with. Because I was like, I've heard of this, and I think that's why. That's wild.
And Beyond the Forest is most famous today. Edward Albee. The first line in Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf is Martha saying, "What a dump." And that's a famous line from Beyond the Forest that Betty Davis said. She sees the house that she moves in with her new husband, and she goes, "What a dump."
Amazing.
So,
yes.
But that film came out. She did not want to do Beyond the Forest, and she told Jack Warner that multiple times. She finally gave in. She finally did it. She said Virginia Mayo, who was like kind of the vamp, the femme fatale at the studio, should do it. Virginia Mayo did not do it. Betty Davis did it. Even before they stopped production, she said she would sit up late at night thinking, she was like, if it's still going to be this hard to root for good scripts and good characters to play, she said, then this isn't really worth it anymore, because she had gone through this whole law trial, this whole traumatic process. So in 1949, in the middle of the night, during the production of Beyond the Forest, she called Jack Warner. She said, "I went out of my contract." And she said he immediately hung up, called her back several hours. He said, "All right, you're out of your contract. After you finish this film, you can go and do whatever you want to." She got out of her contract. I mean, there was no great applause, no kind of celebration when she left the studio, nothing celebrating Betty Davis. She immediately she got together with director Curtis Bernhardt. She had worked with Curtis Bernhardt on several different films. They got together, they wrote a script called Story of a Divorce, which turned into the title Payment on Demand. They sold that script, and this is just like happened in the several weeks after she left Warner Brothers. She sold it to Howard Hughes, who was the head of RKO. Howard Hughes bought it. They turned it into a movie. And then the last few days, this is where we get back up to All About Eve. The last few days of production, like she still had 5 days left. She got a call on the set of Payment on Demand. And it turned out, when she answered the phone, the person said, "Betty, this is Daryl Zanuck." And she thought it was somebody ribbing her because of that nasty telegram he had sent back to her in 1941. And she said, "Daryl, darling, how are you?" Really just led him on for a good several minutes because she thought it was somebody ribbing her because he had been so nasty to her. Daryl said, "Well, I've got a great script to send you." And Betty said, "Well, that's fantastic. Send it right over." He said, "Do you want to know what it is?" "No, not really. Just surprise me." And he caught on that she was joking. He knew that she thought that it was a joke. And so he said, Betty, this is a script by Joseph L. Mankiewicz, who had just won the Oscar for A Letter to Three Wives. And this is the role that Claudette Colbert was going to play, but you read, because it had been published in, like, tabloids that Claudette Colbert had broken her back on the set of her previous film. And she was like, oh, she was like, I'm so sorry. And so they talked for a few minutes more. Daryl Zanuck sent a script over to RKO. Betty Davis got it on the set of Payment on Demand. She took the script. She read it on the way back to her house in Laguna Beach. She stayed up reading it all night. She learned all of her lines. She closed herself in her bedroom with just cigarettes and scotch, because that's all you need when you're...
That's all you need.
That's all you need when you're reading a new great script. And so she said that was up to that time, that was the best script she had ever written. And she was known as going on set and rewriting all of the scripts and directing everybody, all of that stuff. And so she called Daryl Zanuck the next morning. She said, Daryl, I would love to play Margot Channing. And then she called Mankiewicz, and he invited her to dinner that night. He said, he told her that Margot is the type of woman who would treat her mink coat like a poncho. Says a lot about the character right there. And then she said, yeah, so who's playing Bill? And he said, well, Gary Merrill. And Gary Merrill was somewhat of an unknown at this point. He had been in a lot of war pictures for Fox, and he had just appeared in a very successful film called 12 O'Clock High with Gregory Peck, which Betty had actually seen.
I know that.
You've seen 12 O'Clock High?
I know that one.
Oh.
I have. I was a real big Gregory Peck lover because he is super hot to me. So I went through a Gregory Peck phase. That included 12 O'Clock High. I've seen most of it, if not all of it. I can't remember at this moment, but oh yeah, big fan.
Yes.
Yeah, I love him to death.
Betty had seen 12 O'Clock High too, and she said Gary Merrill is perfect. She said, I feel like he's one of the only... He will be strong enough to be able to handle Margot. So then Mankiewicz said, okay, that's fantastic. He said, we start shooting. I think, he said, we start shooting in a week. In a week, you need to have all of your costume sketches picked out. You need to be fitted for all of your costumes and have some of the costumes made for the scenes that they would start shooting. So she said, okay, fantastic. Charles Lemaire, who had designed for the Ziegfeld Folly, he was now head of the Fox costume department. She said, I do not want him designing my costume. I want Edith Head has to design my costume. She loved Edith Head because she had worked with her on June Bride. And Betty said Edith was not a woman who designed costumes to like star her own clothes in the movies. She designed costumes to fit the character. Hello, friends! Are you enjoying the production history behind All About Eve? Well, then be sure to tune in on Friday, September 9th, to hear part 2 of the production history behind All About Eve, wherever you may find your podcasts, only on the Hollywood Babylonians. You have been listening to the Hollywood Babylonians. The Hollywood Babylonians is produced, hosted, edited, and written by Ben Berg and co-hosted by Hallie Platts. Audio engineering by Andrew Davis, with research by Ben Berg. Artwork by Ben Berg and Jamie Lee. If you liked what you heard today, be sure to follow us on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube at The Hollywood Babylonians for more Hollywood Babylonians content. Tune in on Friday, September 9th to hear part 2 of the production history behind All About Eve. Thank you for listening and have a good night.